Welcome back. Well, as often happens, it would seem, Western Australia. Its mines, its mining moguls, even its politicians are in the news these days. Here to discuss it all, and maybe a few other distractions in the federal parliamentary playhouse at the moment, Senator Matthias Cormann, Shadow Assistant Treasurer, talking to me from Canberra. Welcome back to the show, Senator Cormann.
Good to be back, Janine.
Now, it's all happening over there in WA. I'll ask you a simple question first up. I presume you are in support and of these EMAs, bringing in foreign workers, skilled workers to fill the gap for the mines over there?
Well, of course I am. And I'm supportive of growing our economy. I'm supportive of getting these big projects off the ground. And, of course, I mean, to put this into context, I mean, the project, the Roy Hill project, is a $9.5 billion project. It will have about 8,000 workers in the construction phase. And, of course, so 1,700 workers potentially from overseas as part of the enterprise migration agreement, and another 6,300 workers, of course, sourced out of Australia. Now, these big projects, these capital-intensive projects, of course, in order to lock in finance, you, of course, have to have certainty around the supply of labour. And these enterprise migration agreements, which are in fact an initiative of the Gillard Labor government announced in the last budget, are of course a pretty good way of providing additional flexibility around these arrangements.
I'm going to stop there because it's an historic moment. I just want to check. So you're actually in line with Julia Gillard, David Bradbury. You're saying this is a good thing they're doing and you support it. They're getting a tick from you this time.
Well, I think it's a good policy, but of course the way they've implemented it yet again, you know, has been marred by division, dysfunction, and incompetence.
We'll get to
Julia Gillard.
We'll get to the politics of it in a minute. I just want to do the business of it first. Yeah. Just clearing that up then. So you're in agreement with Julia Gillard and David Bradbury, or not so Julia Gillard.
Well, I'm not sure how much David Bradbury had to do with it.
Well, no, but I mean, he came out today. You often comment that he's not. But listen, it does seem to put you at odds. I'll list the people now lining up on the other side of this debate. Campbell Newman, the Liberal Premier of Queensland. Clive Palmer, Liberal supporter and another mining mogul. Bob Katter. And National Senator John Williams said today that he thought there should be a hold on these EMAs. Now, they're all from your side of the fence. What do you say to all them?
Well, I mean, as I say to you, like, we support enterprise migration agreements. I mean, we understand that for these big projects to get off the ground, in order to attract the capital to get those projects off the ground, you do need to be able to provide certainty around the supply of labour. Now, in Western Australia, in those remote areas where a lot of these sorts of mining activities occur, it is not always as easy as we would like it to be to attract the necessary workforce domestically. It is not everybody's cup of tea. And of course, to have that opportunity through enterprise migration agreements to supplement a significant domestic workforce with overseas sourced labour as required is of course an appropriate step that the government has taken.
But we're just surprised. Isn't it a bit embarrassing for your side of politics to be attacking the government for being split over this decision when you've got a National Senator, a Liberal Premier and a Liberal donor taking another side?
Well, hang on, Janine. I mean, what we're talking about here is the Australian government, the Australian cabinet. On Saturday, in the Australian newspaper, the Prime Minister of this country was suggesting that somehow she was furious about the agreement that had been entered into by her government, on behalf of her government, by Ministers Bowen and Ferguson, and of course, implementing a policy that was, of course, adopted by her government. So you've got the Prime Minister, who is supposed to be in charge of this show, telling us, on one hand, trying to send a message to the unions that she disagrees and disapproves of what Minister Bowen has been doing, a senior minister in her government, and then on the other hand, when the question was asked in the Parliament, telling us that she supports those enterprise migration agreements, including the one for the Roy Hill project. I mean, like, surely there is a world of difference between John Williams as a National Party senator representing his constituents, expressing a view, quite frankly, which is not inconsistent with what I've just said to you. Of course, in the first instance, these sorts of jobs should go to Australian workers. But of course, if there are no Australian workers available to fill these sorts of positions, the enterprise migration agreement, provides an appropriate avenue to provide certainty around the supply of labour.
Given that you're there in Western Australia, you've obviously dealt with this, you talk to the mines. It's sometimes hard for the people on the East Coast to fathom it, or observers, when you're seeing this rush of, like Senator Williams mentioned, the hasty, thousands of jobs losses. Now, they're skilled, they're engineers. We've seen construction workers. These seem to be the people you're looking for. What is it that stops people going to Perth in the same nation? I talked with someone last night. Americans move to other states. Do you find it bizarre people will not up and move? Single people, younger people, there's still unemployment in this country.
Well, Janine, I mean, firstly, a lot of people do. But some people, it just doesn't suit their circumstances. I mean, obviously, from my point of view, and from the Coalition's point of view, we do think it's important that we find a way to better match up those people looking for work with those businesses looking for workers. But, I mean, I mean, just to make the point, though, I mean, you talk about Eastern States perspectives. I mean, these aren't jobs in Perth. I mean, these are jobs in a remote area 200 kilometres south of Port Hedland. And of course, this particular project, the Roy Hill project, will have 8,000 workers in the construction phase. And what we're talking, so that is 6,300 jobs at least for Australians.
I know, but I'm sure there's many more people than that taking unemployment benefits. I just want to check, Senator Cormann, it was your party that introduced work for the dole. I was saying to someone yesterday, it hasn't been long since we used to talk about people dole bludgers. I mean, there used to be a feeling if there was a job out there, you couldn't, you shouldn't be accepting unemployment benefits and sitting on a beach on the East Coast. I mean, do you think, and suddenly everybody's doing all this sympathetic rhetoric, oh, people don't want to move, it's a bit much to expect. Don't you think perhaps we need to get a bit tougher, particularly for people who long-term unemployed, perhaps who need to be reskilled, maybe should think of moving if they don't have a family?
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, the Coalition had a very clear and a very strong policy in this area. I mean, Work for the Dole is a Coalition government initiative. In fact, it's an initiative that was introduced by Tony Abbott when we were last in government. People who are of working age and who are healthy and who have family circumstances that don't prevent them from shifting, of course, should work. Preferably for wage, and if not for wage, they should work for the dole. I mean, that is a consistent policy position that we've held, and we have put, when we were last in government, put funding in place to facilitate retraining and reskilling to help people who've lost a job finding a new job, including, of course, in Western Australia.
But look, I take your point about Port Hedland, but as I understand it, because that's sucking everybody up north in Western Australia, there's unskilled jobs. You can't get a waiter, you can't get lots of jobs going in Perth that people could do.
And again, I mean, this is not in Port Hedland. It is 200 kilometres south of Port Hedland, so it is well and truly in one of the sort of remote areas of Western Australia. And look, I mean, I'm sure that Hancock Prospecting or the Roy Hill project, if they had a reliable supply of labour for 8,000 construction workers domestically, I'm sure that they would go down that path. But obviously, in order to get the finance together, you've got to be able to provide some certainty that you will be able to deliver this project on time and on budget.
I understand that. I'll just move on to a couple of other things. Another West Australian Labor senator, Labor's Glenn Stirl, today called on the government to push the Buy Australia, to push miners harder to source Australian products and buy Australia. Now, this has been something that's been talked about for a long time. He's calling on his own government to do it. What's your policy on this? Do you support him on that?
Well, I mean, we support that mining companies should buy local wherever that is possible. And I mean, if I can just make the point, and people sort of mix up a few issues here. I mean, in the iron ore industry, the level of local content is actually very high. When I last visited the Rio Tinto mining operations out of Karratha, the advice that I received was that local content is about 85%. 85%. And apparently, I mean, there are some regular reporting requirements there in relation to the state government in Western Australia and so on. I think that where the issue comes in is not so much in relation to mining. It is more in relation to oil and gas and more particularly our LNG projects, where a lot of the infrastructure that is required for that is not actually available to be sourced in Australia. It does much of that infrastructure, much of that capital equipment gets sourced from overseas. Now, I mean, of course,
Just one other quick thing, because you put out a press release today, though I must say you should win an award for persistence in press releases. They say, Tony Abbott said today that Julia Gillard won't lay down and die. Well, I know you're doing your bit. Now, one of the ones I was interested in today was about worrying about changes onto taxation that could affect foreign investment. If you could just sum it up in about 30 seconds, can you tell us what your concern is there?
Well, our concern is that the Labor Party keeps chopping and changing our taxation arrangements. They keep adding new taxes which make us less competitive internationally. We want to see lower taxes so we can attract more investment, so we can grow our economy more strongly, because a stronger growing economy delivers increased government revenue without the need for all these new taxes.
Well then, Senator, can I ask how that sits with Malcolm Turnbull's comments over the past week that he wants to increase the tax on foreign nationals like Google, who he doesn't think is paying enough? Surely that's at odds with what you just said.
I mean, no, he doesn't actually say he wants to increase their tax. He wants to make sure they pay their fair share. He wants to make sure that they pay a fair share of tax, which is a completely different proposition, consistent with what applies to any other equivalent company operating in Australia. So, I mean, I think that you're sort of mixing a few issues here. What we're talking about in terms of the withholding tax issue on managed investment trusts is a tax that applies equally to everyone, and the government wants to double that from 7.5% to 15%, which we think sends a bad message to the global investment community. It is yet another tax grab which sends a sovereign risk message to global investors around the world. What Malcolm Turnbull was talking about is making sure that multinationals operating in Australia pay their fair share of tax in Australia consistent with our existing laws.
Well, thank you, Senator Cormann. I'm glad you've cleared that up, and it's all happy families on the finance team, the finance front bench of the coalition. We're glad to hear that tonight. Thank you very much, Senator Matthias Cormann, there, Shadow Assistant Treasurer. That's all for tonight, but I suggest you back up